The Abercrombie Kids Summer Sale is in full swing, with up to 50% off select styles for the season. Summer plans, vacation, and camp days are all covered, with new dresses, shorts, tees, and swim. Abercrombie Kids has the summer staples they need and the looks that they want to wear. Shop in-store, online, or in the app. Offer applies to select styles as indicated. Discount applied at checkout online.
I'm not coming at anybody. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm just trying to say this is life and it happened. And now here I am, So I don't know that my story coming out has truly hurt anybody over here, the key players, because I would like to think that my book has freed my raised father from having to carry those secrets anymore. And I hope that it has freed my biological father from having to, exit his lifetime, having to say, well, I didn't reach out to her. I didn't talk to that girl. I didn't give her the time of day. He did sit down with me. And if that's all I ever get, he at least can know that he gave me that, right?
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Hands down, one of my favorite things about hosting this podcast is the connections that I've made within this community. From keeping in touch with guests to hosting the DNA Surprise Retreat to the special group of folks who join our Third Thursday meetups, I'm so grateful for the connections that I've formed. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Jill, who first appeared on the podcast in February of last year. She has since released her second memoir, which is focused on her DNA surprise. She joined me to discuss all that's happened since she first appeared on the podcast. We discussed some of my burning questions around her book, When You Shake the Family Tree, as well as where she's currently at with her biological family. You can find your copy of Jill's book at justbeingjill.com. Thanks for joining me again, Jill. Welcome to a special update episode of DNA Surprises. I am joined today by Jill, who joined me, was it a year ago? 2 years ago?
Last February
1 year
2024.
ago.
Of course, we probably recorded it a few months prior to the actual release, but it released 1 year ago.
That's right. And when we last spoke, Jill was writing a book. She'd already written one. And then she was going to write another, or in the process of writing another, specifically about her DNA surprise. And she has since released the book. And there are even more updates since we last spoke. And I'm really excited to get into it. I've read the book. I have tons of questions. And Jill joins us regularly on our Third Thursday calls. So I've heard bits about the things that have happened in her story as it's progressed, but the book really does dive a lot deeper into some of the things that have happened. And so I'm really excited to dive in. Thank you for joining me again, Jill.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's such a pleasure to be able to come back and give you and your followers an update and talk about what's happened.
Yes. Well, so let's just jump in. What happened after we last spoke?
Well, interesting you should say that, because I, of course, listened to our episode this morning just to kind of give myself a refresher. And one of the things that we did leave off with was the hopes that my book would be coming out very soon after that episode launched, or perhaps even when that episode was launching last February. And I realized, wow, that is exactly about the time I sat on my book like an egg. I had to take a big pause and break away from the project. That's the thing with writing memoir, is that, it's such an emotional roller coaster that there were many times throughout the project where I would be in this big time writing mode and get a whole bunch done. And then I'd hit something that really struck a nerve and I would have to walk away for some time. And sometimes that could be a couple days. Sometimes that turned into a couple of months. And after our podcast, I can't remember a particular episode that might have set me back, but for some reason, I really started procrastinating and I put the project away for a little bit. And then before you know it, spring was springing and I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this done. I had found somebody to help me publish the book and they had given me a bit of a time frame, like, okay, this is when it could happen. So I treated myself as a second-time memoir writer to a lake house property for 4 days where I locked myself inside. It was in this beautiful lakefront community, but it was April here in Western New York, so that's still quite a bit chilly and yucky for us. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote until that book was done. And right about that exact time, I was continuing to work with my therapist and come to find out the thing that was holding me back was I was afraid to write the ending of my story. I was afraid in whatever tone I ended that book would be what I would be willing or calling in for myself, or kind of putting, a hard line in my story. And then I felt like I was going to have this feeling like it was coming to an end or that was going to be it. And it took my therapist to walk me through that and say, Jill, you're the author. You get to write the ending. You're going to leave it nice and open-ended. And that's going to invite in whatever is supposed to come. And so when I took that 4-day hiatus from the world and finished writing, that's exactly what I did. I made sure that I wrote the story, very detailed to what was going on with all of the episodes that had been happening, but also very open-ended so that there wasn't closure or anything definitive. And so it got finished late last spring of 2024. The editing process started happening through the summer of 2024, got submitted to the publishing company in the fall. And on December 12th of 2024, When You Shake the Family Tree finally came out and hit the world. Yay!
Congratulations. That's just a remarkable feat. Not one, but two memoirs. And I know when you were last on the podcast, I think kind of where we left off was this rejection from your biological father, kind of feeling like it was open-ended, but leaning towards rejection. And I'm not going to ask you to give the whole book away because, as I said, she does dive much deeper in the book. But what has happened with your biological father since we last spoke?
I would love to say that we have this wonderful friendship and growing desire to get to know each other on a deeper level. But unfortunately, that is not the case. I have really gotten nowhere as far as building relationship with my biological father. It has been a very, very slow process. His family has been wonderful. They have been attempting to, reach out on a holiday and say, hey, you guys can come if you'd like. On this past Christmas, an aunt and a cousin reached out to a gathering that he was not at, but, some of the family members were. But I dare say that disappointingly, there really has not been any progress with my biological father. And we are 3.5 years out now. But I will add that I do feel like there have been some small baby steps because this past summer, my husband actually was at an event that my biological father was at. And of course, he was like, oh my God, I'm here and your biological father's here. And I was like, you had better go up to him and introduce yourself. So he did. And they kind of chatted for a little bit. And I don't know if meeting my husband put more of a understanding of the fact that I'm like a real person with like this family in this package. So that was in the fall. And this past Christmas, we got a Christmas card and it was addressed to my husband and myself. And I had gotten a Christmas card, as I talk about in the book, the year prior to myself, but this year it was to my husband and I. And it actually included a gift card and some very kind words. And I was beside myself. I did feel like it was a major step, like major progress to address the Christmas card now to my husband and myself, like acknowledging that I'm a woman with a family and the gift inside. I mean, I don't even care if it was like a little piece of paper at this point. It was a gift. And for me, it was his way of saying how difficult all of this has been, but that doesn't mean he's not thinking and, wishing he had the way forward, if you will. And at the end of his gesture, it said something to the effect of, because he goes to Florida for the winter, and it said something to the effect of, maybe we can get together upon my return, or something to that effect. And I try not to hang my hat on those words because he has said things like that in the past. But that, coupled with the fact that his family has been trying and making an attempt, I do feel in my heart of hearts that something will transpire. I don't know that it'll be anything enormous and epic, but I do feel like maybe more conversations will be had at some point. I feel that way.
One of the things I was really struck by in your book is when you share some of the things that he wrote to you and that you wrote to him. And I think sometimes we paint these rejections as very black and white. And like, it's a blatant, like, I don't want to talk to you, stay out of my life, that kind of thing. He's pretty cordial in his communication with you. And I'm curious if that has made the rejection harder in some ways, because it's like the door is always a little bit open.
Yes.
But then it's taken a long time to get to this point.
Agreed. And that's a great question, because obviously in writing the story, and then when you go through editing, you're like rereading the story 100,000 times. And every time I would reread those letters that were from a year or two prior, they had like so much hope to them. Like, I was like, wow, something's really going to happen here. These are very hopeful. And I, of course, convinced myself that he said those things because he meant those things. And then it's that inner critic that comes out after we say them that tears us down and sets us back, right? So I would convince myself like, okay, he wouldn't have said those things if he didn't really mean those things. So somewhere deep down inside there is a man who's just as curious as I am. It's just going to take longer for him to scratch his way to the surface. And I agree. In fact, I agree so much that I have kind of described my book as a love story, because it does feel like that. It's not like this big, grandiose love story of a father meeting a daughter, but just the way we communicated back and forth, there was just like so much hope for a loving relationship to bloom. So I know exactly what you mean when you say, and I do use the things that are quoted in there are verbatim, the way that it all unfolded. I wrote in real time with real emotion. Like I said, sometimes I had to walk away from it, but I didn't want to tell the story in hindsight. I very much wanted to tell it as it was happening, because it was important for me. One of my biggest goals as a writer for that book was I wanted all of our people in our community to understand that it is a roller coaster. One chapter, it sounds like a love story and it's beautiful, and I'm sharing these letters back and forth. And the next chapter, I'm taking a complete nosedive and spiraling, and I don't know what to think. And won't somebody love me? And won't somebody choose me? And then the next chapter, I'm back up again. And I really thought that it was important to do this journey that justice. And even at the end of the book, it's the same feeling. You just don't know what's around the next corner. You just have to be open for it. In fact, one of my favorite lines or things I say in the book is, I'm having a conversation with my therapist and we talk about, does it ever get any better? And she says to me, no, Jill, it doesn't get better, but it does get different. And I mean, that just is the epitome of this journey, right? I'm sure you can relate to that.
Absolutely. And I was also really struck by, he doesn't say, he's kind of a man of few words, but reading between the lines and even just reading what he does say, it sounds like he was pretty profoundly affected by you reaching out and this information too. Has writing this book given you any sense of empathy for his side of the story?
I think definitely not only his, but everybody's, my raised fathers, all the players involved. I'm pretty convinced that more people knew the story than are letting on. However, I'm also aware of the fact that it's my perspective, right, that's driving my story and creating the story in my head. And that there is, in fact, a chance that many of these people had no clue, including him, And even if he had, let's just say he had an inkling or a clue, 50 years is a lot of time to go by to not be thinking about something, to really be thinking about it the way that I am, right? So I just have compassion for the different perspectives here. I truly do. I mean that with all of my heart. I think a lot of that also comes from you and your podcast and all of the people out there, and hearing so many variables and so many perspectives and sides of stories to understand, it is. Can you imagine? I can't imagine somebody coming to me with this news. Now, my husband and I have joked, like if he was in the service, what would happen if somebody stepped forward and said that, he was their father? And I was like, oh my God, I would be dying to meet her. And my daughters were like, oh my God, we would want to be, and it's like, but we have to remember that it's also different times. And it's just not like it was when our parents were younger and everything was a secret or swept under the rug. It's just, things are so different. And it's so hard to remember that when you're trying to be respectful of what is happening in somebody else's mind.
Absolutely. One of the things, speaking of this empathy and compassion for everyone in the story, is your book really does embrace that dialectical thinking where more than one thing can be true or two things can be true at once. I know you had a very complicated, your raised father, was abusive. And then to read in the book that he actually didn't, and hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler, so I'll take it out if you want me to, but that he didn't think that any of his children were biologically related to him was really
heartbreaking.
It was heartbreaking to read that. And obviously it does not excuse anything that he did or any of the choices that he's made in his life. But just having that, it made me feel compassion for him, where the first time that we talked, I really just felt anger towards him, for abusing his children. And then to learn that maybe he was carrying a lot of pain around the fact that, he had raised these children, that your mother had told him, like, this child isn't yours. And then the child was your brother, Eric, mentioned in the book, is his child, but he'd gone his whole life not believing that. Was just so painful.
Hearing you tell me that part of the story back is literally sending shivers up my spine. And you're right. I do have compassion, because I can't imagine being so tattered and torn in my soul that somebody could tell me those things about my children, and at the time make the choice that I'm not going to tell these children because they need me and I'm their father and I don't want to hurt them because their mother is already hurting all of us. And to think, I can't imagine looking at my own children, who I believe are mine. I mean, I gave birth to them, but being a male
yes.
And thinking that, and like I say in the book, I couldn't understand why, like when I emancipated myself when I was younger, my parents signed right off like nothing. Okay, bye-bye. And when my father was estranged from my oldest brother, who is his clone, that he could be so far removed. But of course, if you had those seeds planted in your head, I have a lot of compassion for him. He was an alcoholic who was trying to drink away all of those feelings and those truths and those lies. And you're right, it does not justify how he treated me as a child, but it certainly makes me understand.
Yeah. So well said. Well, I think the overarching theme of your book is breaking generational cycles. We don't have to adhere to the patterns that have preceded us in our lives. And this is something that we talk about a lot in our community. And I highlighted in the book here, and this is in the introduction, you say, I have forever been agitated by the phrase, it runs in the family, as if it were simply fact, a life sentence with no room for change. Yes, it runs in my family, and I've decided this is where it runs out. I love that. Why do you think that this theme of generational cycles, generational shame, pattern breaking is so resonant in our community?
Absolutely. So, the thing is even when I released my first memoir, which was prior to my DNA discovery, I was astounded by the number of people who reached out to me and, held up the Me Too hand when talking about abuse and domestic violence and lies and cover-ups. And people I would have never guessed, from my community or my own family reaching out and saying, yes, this happened. And oh my goodness, this, that. And when I started writing my DNA memoir, I had no idea that what was really bestowed upon me was a quest of ancestral healing. And I mean that quite literally. The irony of this whole situation is my grandmother who raised me, who is my person, the best person who was ever in my life for me for my first 3 decades of life, is not even my grandmother. But the healing that I am doing is for her because she lived through her own NPE experience. She lived through terrible, terrible things as a wife and as a mother and as a sister. And as I began to kind of heal and process everything that was happening to me, I felt like I was paying homage to my grandmother who had been suppressed and unable to heal from all of these things. I mean, to the point that I was like literally going to, the cemetery and praying to her and saying like, I am doing this for us. I'm doing this for my children. This stops here kind of business. And it just felt so important and so liberating. And I think that, and that's not to say that everybody's going to go digging and find like all these family secrets. But in my case, there were a bunch. There are a bunch that are not even mentioned in the new book because they're not my story to tell. Mm-hmm. But I feel like it's just like what we said about the other things in that, it's what makes us human when we see that other people and other families have these same dynamics. The difference is our generation is concerned about healing. We're concerned about being vocal and stopping things that, are of no good for us and the future generations. And so we are willing to say what is, call a spade, and say, let's stop it, let's heal it, let's forgive it, let's move on from it. And thank God for that. Thank God for that,
Yeah, it's true. It's so many of these people that I speak to are committed to not perpetuating secrets and shame. And the fact that that was basically the theme of your book made absolute sense to me because that is the overarching theme of what we live and what we hope to stop.
Sure. I mean, there is even a chapter in the book, and again, I don't want to give huge spoilers to you, but you probably recall reading the chapter where I throw myself under the bus about something, shaky in my own marriage. And, I had to go to my husband for permission to share that chapter, and I had to have a conversation with my grown adult daughters about what was going to be in there. And I could get choked up just thinking about it right now, but just writing that chapter elicited family conversations that needed to be had. And I'm so proud of myself for having those conversations and for helping other people to see what those conversations can do for moving forward. And I hope that, being so honest about my own life also shows my parents that I understand.
Yeah. Right. It's normalizing what it is to be human.
Exactly. I mean, when we just can't think that it can't happen to us, because it can, and it does. I didn't want to just preach, okay, let's tell the truth. Let's all just talk about it and heal from it, without saying, hey, look, I had to do some of my own healing and forgiveness work within my own family construct. Nobody gets a free pass. We're all going to go through something.
Right. The next question that I really wanted to ask you was, of course, and this isn't selfish, but you talk about like listening to podcasts and hearing these stories. And one of the things, and really that your story is not that big of a deal kind of in the grand scheme of things. But one of the things, which I want to say is not true. Your story is a big deal in your life. What I mean. But I know exactly what you mean. It's common. It is common. It's not unique,
Correct.
and one of the things that you mentioned was specifically that the way that you were conceived by a neighbor, basically somebody that you knew in your life as a child, is actually a relatively common scenario. And I actually like the way that you put that, like my story isn't that big of a deal, because again, you're normalizing what it is to be human. These things happen. It's not great for us to find out this way. But at the same time, we're not alone when we go through this.
It's actually more common than we think. Correct.
Yeah. So one of the things that you said around that kind of section, though, was that some people have said that your suspicions lessened the blow, quote, lessened the blow of your discovery, because you had always kind of wondered, since your mom made that sort of angry proclamation and then walked it back, that the fact that you'd maybe always wondered lessened the blow of your discovery. And I'm curious if you agree with that. Do you think that it was less devastating to you because it was a question in the back of your mind?
On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want, like that dream house or ride, is a great feeling. That's why the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you save when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Oh, that's a loaded question. I guess being 3.5 years out now, I could definitely say wholeheartedly that it did not lessen the blow to know. My world was flipped upside down, inside out, right side up, as I say in the book, and it's still on the spiral or tilt. So no, it didn't lessen the blow. I appreciate that I had the inkling in hindsight, because had my mother not said that or gave me a name that day, I probably would have never had the suspicions, right? So the fact that that seed was planted helped, but it didn't lessen the blow, because the identity crisis is so real and palpable that it didn't even matter. I mean, I think there are points in the story where I talk about the fact that I get that information when I'm little, but as I'm growing up and living next door to these people, I never once looked out the window and was like, gee, could that be my family? That's the people my mom was talking about. I never even made that connection. And even later in life, when I like joked with a cousin, when I saw them at a party, I'm like, hey, you could be related to me. Like, I'm like thinking of like, like distant cousins. I'm not thinking like related to me, like, oh, your grandparents are my freaking grandparents, right? Like totally. I did not understand it when I was given the information. Therefore, it did nothing more than leave an itch. Yes. But I would definitely say that I couldn't believe, like, even when I go to my brothers that I was raised with, right? And they're like, wait a minute, we kind of thought you already knew that, And, no, I didn't. And then I think about the conversation that I had to have with my older brother when he found out that my dad didn't even think he was his dad. And I had to talk that through with him. You know what I mean? Like, that's also an identity crisis. And it's just like, holy cow, this is what one lie can do, or three lies in our case, right? And again, we had the factor of, we did have an NPE brother who was a known NPE. So if his was such a public thing, why would we really think that about ourselves, No, it didn't lessen the blow, but it prepared me for the hit.
Oh, that's such a good way of putting it. I was really curious about that because in talking to so many people, there are many ways that we arrive to our DNA surprises. There's people like me. I did not know. Completely surprised. But I agree with you. And, maybe somebody else listening out there might feel differently too. But getting the actual result, getting that confirmation is very different than having some possibility float in your mind.
Absolutely.
Because even after I got my results, right, I did so many mental gymnastics to say that's not real. That even though I'm holding it in my hand on my phone, I can see the results. I was still making it not add up. And I can only imagine that when you get that information and there is no confirmation, it's just kind of a throwaway thing and in your case, from somebody that's not necessarily a reliable narrator. It's easy to dismiss it, make other things make sense. Like you said, your brother was an NPE. Like if he was an NPE and we knew, obviously I would know if I was. Yeah. It's really easy. So I feel like that idea of having it in your mind lessen the blow. I just, when I read that, I was like, gosh, that seems invalidating to the experience that you've had.
Yeah, true. And at different points, I probably would have answered that question differently, to be honest with you. Because there are I guess it's almost like not survivor's guilt, but guilt. Like sometimes when I hear stories such as yours, where people didn't have a freaking inkling, I kind of like tell myself, well, geez, you should be thankful. At least you kind of had a hunch, buried weight, even if it was buried deep, deep inside and you didn't want to believe it, it was kind of there. At least your mother kind of gave you that seed, right? But then if you think too about, if we fast forward in my book a little bit more, where I do end up, now I've populated to the family tree of my next door neighbors. Okay. I know because my mother had given me the name, like, okay, there's no doubt about it. This story is real, blah, 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 blah. But then I get to the point where I do decide I'm going to ask my biological father for an actual paternity test. I work through that with my therapist as well. And I'm thinking the whole time that I'm asking him for this paternity test that I'm doing it because he needs it, right? Like I'm the one who saw the Ancestry results. He's not on Ancestry, so he doesn't even see that I connected to his tree. Now, I did show his sons who could have very well told him, like, we saw it, she's there. But he was not connected to me exactly in any way, shape, or form. So I request this paternity test thinking maybe he'll be able to really embrace me more if he can really just see it in black and white. And then, my therapist says those words to me, which is, Jill, did you ever think that you needed the paternity test? Did you ever stop to think for a second that that piece of paper is going to be the only thing that is actually going to show your actual birth father? It's going to be the only evidence of who your father is in real life. And I was like, holy shit, she is 100% right. Yes, I did want it for him, but I think I wanted and needed it for me even more. That paper is like gold to me.
I think that that's something that many in our community can resonate with, the need for that proof, that paper, that acknowledgement. I mean, you hear a lot of people get their birth certificates updated and things like that because it's just so important to have that evidence. I mean, I talk about that too. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but to really dig in and get my birth certificate updated, because for me, it's the only evidence. It's the only thing that would tie me to my biological father. Because if you do any other sort of PI work or something on the internet, my dad that raised me is the one I grew up with and is how, that is who it's going to look like I'm biologically related to.
Yeah, and I think about it for historical sake, right? I mean, not even for like, get your name off my birth certificate, this is what I'm talking about, like moving forward in history. I'm not part of this family. I'm actually part of this family, and let the record show what is, right?
Absolutely. You mentioned your brothers. How are things with them, your newfound biological brothers?
They're also at a snail's pace. I don't want to discount the fact that we have established a bit of a relationship, and I am so freaking grateful for that. So I think in the book, the last thing I leave off with was last St. Patrick's Day. And then I do go to the family reunion in the summer. It's a week-long event for them. And my biological father and I were not there on the same day, but he went the day after me. And I was invited to my biological father's sister's house for Christmas this year because a cousin was up that I have connected with. They were at these things, but for example, my older brother has a daughter who lives here in my town who, she's very social in my town. So am I. 3.5 years, I still haven't met my niece. I don't know that she even has a desire to meet me. I have met her brothers, which are my nephews, but I have not met her for whatever reason is going on. I know she's very close with her grandmother, which would be my half-brother's mother. So I don't know if there's like a protection thing there. Although the boy's mother, she has kind of reached out. I think she's okay with the fact that I have found and told my story. And I think she even has curiosities and would like to talk someday. And I'm basically open to sitting down and talking with anybody. But as far as the boys are going, it's there, but it's very slow and it's still very guarded, I think, because of where their dad is at.
You mentioned that you can write the story. You do leave your story open-ended. Where are you now with everything, and where do you hope it will go?
Oh, I love this question because we just spoke about this in our third Thursday, not this past month, but the month before, and this goes kind of along with that quote of it doesn't get better, it gets different, right? Because we talked about how 3.5 years out, things are much more idle. They don't have a sense of urgency or curiosity like they did in those, maybe that initial year or even 2. Now I have more days where I can go not feeling fixated on it or thinking about it. But there will still be days that will pop up and suck me right back into why not? How do I do this? Should I be making the move? Am I the one that's supposed to keep trying until this happens? Because I've basically told him time and again in some way, shape, or form, via email, through his sons or whatever, I'm here and I'm ready when you are. I'm going to sit back. I don't want to push you or pressure you. You let me know when you're ready. But on the same token, I'm a very spiritual person. I believe in manifestation. I believe in helping to write our own stories. And I do feel like I also don't want to feel like I've thrown in the towel or I've given up, because I haven't. My hope is very much still there. I would like him to sit down at a table and meet my husband and his 2 granddaughters and just acknowledge that they are of him and his family. And even if it were one meeting, just to say, I would like for my daughters to be able to go out in the community. And if they run into this cousin of theirs, be able to say hi in a cordial way and not like turn their head. And I know he's kind of sort of got to be the one to give the green light for that, if you will. Nobody's saying that, but let's face it, that's what's kind of going on here, right? But I do feel like he's warming, but 3.5 years out, my need and my longing for it are definitely dialed down. They're not gone. They never will be. But I think one of the biggest things was that this journey of longing to belong, which has been my whole entire life with my raised family and now with my biological family, has taught me to love and belong with this little family that I have. Like, I have never understood that and cherished that more than I do right now, this year, in this exact time. And for me, I know deep down in my heart of hearts, that is enough. It will be enough for me. And if they come along, that's just gravy, and that'll be a nice little bonus. But I really have what I've been searching for my whole life right here, right now. And I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful that this journey in searching for my biological father really helped remind me of that, for sure.
That's really well stated. Well put. One of the quotes that really stood out to me was when your friend told you, your book is going to help far more people than it is going to hurt. I loved that. I loved that because, having the podcast and getting to talk to so many people and them sharing their stories and, on a personal note, sharing my story and even the little introduction to my episode every week where I'm acknowledging that this thing happened to me. I am protective of my parents and my family. And for a long time, it was in the back of my mind, like, is this hurting them to do this? And so to read that, first of all, in my case, I don't think I'm hurting them. I think they're working through it. But to read that was really freeing because it's that reminder of the difference and the support that you're lending to other people who have been through similar experiences far outweighs any other fallout that might happen as a result of telling our stories.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you, how has putting your story down on paper helped you? And then, I'm curious what you've been hearing from people who have read it.
Great question. So first of all, let me just say, writing the story, I recommend for everybody. I'm not talking about people, you don't have to publish the book, but writing and working through your feelings I was writing things, I didn't even know where these words were coming from half the time. Like, I was like writing my own healing and stirring up forgiveness and things that I didn't know I was capable of and that were deep down inside. So I do recommend, whether it be through journaling or like Eve Sturgis does the processing journal. I did that with her for one round, loved every bit of it. I still do journal, but telling the story has been extremely cathartic. And I think that, because I had a lot of epic episodes even prior to this, like I got sober, I had a weight loss journey, I had cancer, I had this traumatic childhood. I basically said, look, there's no way I'm not supposed to be talking about this stuff. There's just too many things.
Yeah.
But you're right. It comes back to that quote. And I took that quote very, very literally, Alexis. I said to myself, how many people am I going to piss off? Let me count. And I got to like 3 or 4 people who could actually genuinely be pissed off that I was sharing the story. Okay. Or who have a right to be genuinely pissed off that I was sharing any of these stories. And then I thought about the thousands of people out there who have been abused, who need to get sober, who have been through cancer, who have found out that they really didn't belong to their family. And I thought, she's exactly right. It doesn't matter if I piss off a few people. If I piss them off enough that they want to exit my life or they don't want anything to do with me, then that's their loss. And that brings me to the other part of your question, in that I still have, my book has been out since December, and I still have not heard any feedback from my biological side as to the take on what they think about it. I don't know if my biological father read it. I don't know if he will. I don't know if my brothers have, or my aunts or my cousins. The last I checked in with my cousin, she just hadn't gotten to it yet and, was hoping to do so. And of course, I'm dying of curiosity, because I think I did it. I wrote the story in a very tactful manner. And I really, as much as I honored everybody else's perspective, I really just want them to see mine and understand I'm not coming at anybody. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm just trying to say, this is life and it happened. And now here I am, So I don't know that my story coming out has truly hurt anybody over here, the key players, because I would like to think that my book has freed my raised father from having to carry those secrets anymore. And I hope that it has freed my biological father from having to, exit his lifetime, having to say, well, I didn't reach out to her. I didn't talk to that girl. I didn't give her the time of day. He did sit down with me. And if that's all I ever get, he at least can know that he gave me that, right? So I just feel like, well, people might be maybe a little embarrassed initially, a little shamed initially. I hope that nobody is hurt, but that everybody becomes healed.
I don't want to go into any more spoilers other than to say you're a really fantastic storyteller, writer, author.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And for people that have had this experience, I think this book will definitely validate a lot of the feelings that we experience when you outline like the I don't know how many were in the list, but like 10 feelings that you realized didn't make your story as special, when you were listening to the podcast, of not being able to look at yourself in the mirror, of having an out-of-body experience. Like, you kind of go through all of that, and that's really going to help people, far more people than it could have possibly hurt.
That's right.
Where can people find your book if they are interested in reading When You Shake the Family Tree?
Aw, thanks for letting me put in a little plug. So my book is available on Amazon. It is under my pen name, which is Margot Riley. I write under a pen name, not for anonymity, but just out of respect to the players. Obviously, everybody's name is changed in the story, but both of my memoirs are on Amazon, and they are, again, under Margot Riley. But if you go to my website, which is justbeingjill.com. All the information about my books is there. You can even get the first chapter free to my latest memoir if you want to kind of read it and see if it's for you. I believe the introduction and chapter 1 are available once you subscribe at the bottom. And I don't send any daunting things out. It's just so that you can be informed about my books and if I put them on sale or anything like that, you might get a notification. But yeah, justbeingjill.com is the place to go.
Awesome. Jill, thank you so much for joining me for an update and just sharing your progress since we first spoke. I will put the link to your book and your website in the show notes for anyone who's interested. And I'll see you on the next Third Thursday.
You sure will. Thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to come and give this update. I love hearing the continued stories and progress of the people that you spend your time with. I think it's fascinating to hear our similarities and our differences, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate what you do. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you. Thanks again to Jill for joining me. If you want to read her book, When You Shake the Family Tree, pick it up at justbeingjill.com. And if you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. Finally, be sure to join me over at patreon.com/DNA surprises for early, ad-free access to episodes. Until next time, this episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auersalt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auersalt. of Siren Recording Studios.